trying to remember, when would it have been the last time we spoke, Brian? It would have been with Dr. Bruce. I mean, that must have been, what, a year, 2 years ago?
It must be close on 2 years ago, I would say, probably. So it's been a long time.
Certainly has, but the propaganda just seems to be getting more intense every single day. I don't know. Are you noticing that, Brian? That the propaganda is getting worse?
I actually don't notice it much at all these days, David. I'm aware of what's happening with the actual headlines, but if something's getting intense, it's really just an indication of how you're feeling and what's happening inside you. And I think some of the stuff I want to talk about is how you can actually have more control over that, and why it's really important that you should.
Okay. Well, you pose some good questions, and I think we'll start with these. How was it possible to manipulate the masses and get them to abandon critical thinking and their rational minds, carrying out insane mandates and even carrying out atrocities to their fellow men?
Right. Okay. Well, the first part, I think I spoke about in the first talk. It's been a while ago. I'll go over that quite quickly. But the first part was the actual propaganda through the media, which was almost identical to the hypnosis techniques I used to use on the stage every week, right? And so the first thing is to get somebody into a high peak emotional state. And so when you're in a high peak emotional state, such as fear, you become a lot more suggestible. And when you become a lot more suggestible, then what you can do is you start compounding suggestions into people's minds, which they accept. And the other thing is, when you're in an emotional peak state, you also don't have access to your rational mind. That rational mind has gone, right? And so what I used to do every Saturday on when I was doing hypnosis shows would be I would put, for 6 weeks before the show, I would put up all these big scary posters everywhere in the town. You couldn't escape my face. They were everywhere, right? And the whole idea of that is it's starting to build up the excitement. It's starting to get people into this peak emotional state leading up to the show. On the actual night of the show, the last show I did, which was in Virgin Picture House, I had all the posters everywhere. They were in the toilet. If you were having a pee, you'd be looking at my face with these like red eyes staring at you. So you couldn't get away from that. And then I was due to go in at midnight, and then what happened was I didn't appear. And so people was wondering, what the hell's happening here? So what I was doing is I was getting people confused, because I was taking away the normal framework that you would hang your reality on when you go to see a show. So sometimes I would be announced at 15:15 or 20:15, sometimes 30:30 midnight. And then when I was just about to go on, we'd put the lights out so everybody's sitting in the dark. And you could actually hear you could actually feel the atmosphere and people getting really wound up into a really powerful emotional state. And then I'd start to play the creepy music, and then there would be smoke machines and strobe lights, and then I would walk on. So by that time, the people that are going to be hypnotized are already in that highly suggestive state. Now, when I walk on, the next thing I do is I get them involved in a simple ritual. And the ritual for a stage hypnotist is putting your hands together like that and give suggestions that when I count to 10, your hands will get tighter and tighter. And the people that can't pull their hands apart, they're the ones that are responding most. So we quickly get them on the stage and we actually use them. So the next thing is a ritual. And then we start to give them small suggestions that get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The mind's a bit like a piece of stiff cardboard. The more you bend it, the easier it becomes to bend, until you can rip it apart eventually, if that's what you want to do. So that's the idea behind it. Now, what was happening on the propaganda was almost very similar to that.
Yeah.
Because what we did was we were primed by all the images from China weeks and months before it. So we're running all this stuff through our mind that we're being trained how to react. And then the big thing that was the giveaway for me when Boris announced that everybody in the land was going to lose somebody close to them.
That's right.
And right away I said to myself, there's something happening here. Because if you were going to try and get if you were trying to get a country through a serious crisis, the last thing you would do would be wind them into a state of fear.
Yeah. See, when you mention that, my mum always mentions that the thing that really hit her was when Sturgeon said, if you want to see your grandchildren grow up, don't hug them. And she was really upset. She said that really upset, and it scared her. And that's why she followed the advice at the first lockdown.
Well, I actually believe as well that same sort of playing with people's values and twisting them was how they got people to give out vaccinations, even when some of the doctors even knew that they were a bit dodgy and experimental. And I always remember one of my mentors who are trained within the stage hypnosis told me that most stage hypnotists, in order to get volunteers, will say that you can't do anything that goes against your values. And a lot of stage hypnotists do believe that. But what he said to me was, the secret is, if you get somebody wound up enough to the point where they've lost control of their rational mind, and you tell them there's a huge snake on your mother's head, and you give them a sword to cut it off, then there's a chance you'd go right through that snake and plunge right into your mother's head. And that's what I believe the Granny Killers was about. They were actually taking our dearest held values and they were twisting them. So in actual fact, it's like Stalin double speak. Saving your granny was actually isolating your granny and causing her harm. And same with the vaccinations. So it is possible to get people to do things using hypnosis, if you like, by twisting their values and winding them up to the highest state.
The other thing you mentioned, Brian, as well, is the ritualistic aspect of it. And so much of it was like the way you had to queue in line, like, and the way you had to stand in a point. I mean, it was highly and the whole vaccination thing was highly ritualistic as well. You know, the images of going in, lifting up your arm and getting it put in. There was a religiosity to it.
Well, the thing about rituals is they can actually open up your minds to different levels of consciousness. Another thing to realize about emotional states, whenever you're in a peak emotional state, what's happening outside yourself, something you can see, hear, or touch, or a combination of these three things becomes a trigger for that state. So, for example, if you could imagine being at a funeral, you'd be in a peak emotional state. And if I was to come up to you and touch you on the shoulder and say, look, David, I'm really sorry about your loss. If I just did that 3 times, about a year later, you could be at a party completely over your loss. Somebody comes up and says, hi, David, how are you doing? Touches you in the same spot and you feel depressed and you don't know why. So the thing about emotions is they can be engineered that way. And so what I believe a lot of these visual rituals, because I mean a virus is invisible, they needed these theatrical visual rituals, masks, standing in a row, posh voices coming over the tannoy, washing your hands and save the NHS. What they were rituals, but they were also triggers that set that same level of fear so you could never escape it. So when you were going out doing your everyday business, doing your shopping, etc., then these triggers were continually firing off that state of mind and reinforcing it so you couldn't escape it.
I always remember from our previous discussion, and it still sticks with me today, I said, well, why weren't we hypnotized? And you made the point that, well, yes, you actually were, because when you see someone with a mask, it triggers a response. When you see an NHS advert, it triggers a response. And I still think about that to this day, because I hadn't thought about it like that before, that we were bombarded with it, but we reacted in a different way to how they wanted us to. Well,
there's another thing that I've kind of looked into, because I've learnt a lot over that period, because over the last couple of years, I've had people reach out to me from all over the world, and I've worked with people from all walks of life doing therapy, helping them get back with their businesses, helping them get back with their families and that kind of thing. And so I've amassed a little bit, some more kind of knowledge and ways of looking at it. And one of the things I came across was the fact we have these things called hypnotic pendulums. And what a hypnotic pendulum is, it's an unconscious structure that allows masses to be controlled and moved together as one. And a pendulum is a structure that will appear when you get a group of people who are united in a common goal, and possibly some material objects like buildings, furniture, technology. For example, the Houses of Parliament would be a great example of a pendulum. And on an energetic level, when a group of people get together and they think exactly the same way with the same thought perimeters, they create a single current of energy, which then takes on a life of its own and can then move through the masses. And if you think of an everyday simple pendulum, if you think about, for example, a football match in a Mexican wave, or a Mexican wave at a rock concert, that's an example of what we call a flash mob pendulum. And it's the energy that just takes over the audience until it sees its way through. And the thing is, when you're part of a pendulum, you don't have access to your rational mind. You're under the control of the pendulum. And that kind of explains, to some degree, why we have so many politicians that are so irrational right now. They're caught up in this pendulum, and they're getting carried along with it, and they can't get access to their critical thinking. That's my belief.
Well, that kind of goes nicely on to that next question. Why are our politicians totally off the scale these days? And it's interesting you say that, because I think of, you know, the is it Lorna Slater, you know, the Green MSP? Did you ever see her stuff? And there's another one, Maggie Chapman, and then there's the rest of them. But when you listen, when I listen to these politicians, they are basically saying the same things over and over and over again. Are they in some sort of hypnotic trance?
Well, I would believe that they are. I would believe that they are. I mean, the thing is, we're always in a trance of some sort every single day, right? But there's a trance that you can control yourself. So when you're actually on your own, then you're operating from your own past history and your own conditioning, and to a certain extent, your own conscious mind. But when you become part of a bigger group of people, like a political party, then you are actually operating from the pendulum. And the thoughts that are running through your mind and your body aren't actually yours, they belong to the pendulum. And you don't actually have access to your critical mind. And I think that goes, that probably explains to some extent what's happening. And especially Sturgeon as well, when she made a complete fool of herself and had to come up with a third gender of rapist. She couldn't bring herself to say that, you know, like a woman can't have a penis, and it just gets crazier and crazier because it's completely rational. So I actually believe that all these people are working within this pendulum, and these pendulums are really important for our survival, because if we didn't have these unconscious structures, we would never have had civilization. We would never have had to build cities, etc. So that ability to come together and give up your rational mind and move within a single energy current is really important for us to be able to evolve.
I think that's a very interesting point, that there is always going to be an element of just, to use another expression, groupthink. But I talk about the ability to critically analyse and question, and the one I use frequently a lot, because I'm very opposed to our involvement in the war in Ukraine, but we in this country have not had one single elected politician, not one, ask one critical question about our involvement in Ukraine. Now, how is that even possible? I'm not saying they need to come out and be where we are in our opinion, but there isn't one. Out of 650 odd MPs, out of all the devolved parliaments, not one has asked one critical question or said, is this the right move?
Well, the only way I can explain it is, when you talk about pendulum structures, they have their own set of rules and patterns. And one of the most important rule is that you toe the line to keep the stability of the structure in place, or you're ostracized. Now, that would also explain what happened to us, the people on this side who were ostracized from other families. And we felt that we were on our own until we eventually found each other, and we created our own pendulum, our own movement. So
it's interesting, because I mean, I always try and be as critical thinking as possible, and we believe in free speech and debate, but even then, you know, people, we don't like people that don't adhere or conform to our views either. It is interesting when you talk about that, the pendulum structure. I visualize, when you talk about a pendulum, I actually visualize a pendulum but with people sitting on it, like, and then we're flying together.
Yeah, like,
you know, that's my vision.
Well, I mean, some of the stuff I looked into some of the quantum physics stuff, which is a bit kind of weird to say the least. But the idea behind that is, for example, I've got a mug over here that had coffee in it. If I was to pick that mug up, I would look at it and it would appear to be solid. But in actual fact, that mug, the smallest particles, is just made up of pure energy. In fact, everything is made up of pure energy. It's our minds and our perceptions that perceive it as being solid. So our minds perceive a reality, and we all live in different realities based upon who we are, how we're brought up, and all our experiences. So everybody watching this is actually coming from their own reality. Everybody's got their own individual reality. And what happens is, when the pendulum comes out, it's basically energetically moving people in a certain direction, and any action will create a reaction of a greater or equal force. And so what happened, for example, when we all got ostracized at the beginning, this huge pendulum was created with this energy that was forced through the media. And then what happened is it had so long to have a free reign. And then what happened was the opposite reaction started to come in the second wave. Second wave is that we all kind of formed together. And that was an unconscious thing as well.
Neil Oliver speaks about the pendulum. Have you ever spoken to Neil Oliver at all?
No, I haven't.
Because he talks about the pendulum quite a lot. And the other analogy I use, and I know it's maybe a slightly more controversial one, but a lot of people think like National Socialist Germany just happened out of a vacuum. You know, it didn't. You had in the 1920s, well, you had the humiliation of Germany losing the war. You had a hyperinflation. You had, you know, real decadence. You know, the country was on its knees. You know, it didn't just happen by accident. And, you know, Neil Oliver talks about that. And, like, is that fair to say then, Brian, that obviously we're in this world which is very, very left-wing, very woke? I mean, does the pendulum always swing? What does it always do that?
Well, at the moment, in this current time in history, we're living in this dominant woke pendulum, if you like.
Yep.
But the actual woke pendulum that's dominant in left wing is more right wing than anything I've ever seen. And the reason being is that it's the nature of duality. And the idea behind duality is that the only way we can have night is to have day, because we have to compare it with day. The only way you can have freedom is to have oppression. The only way you can have liberalism is to have fascism. And what happens is when one side of the pendulum, extreme side, tries to eliminate the other, it becomes a paradox, and it becomes the source of the very thing it's trying to eliminate. So, for example, the left want to get rid of the fascists, and then what they've done is they've become the fascists in the process. So what I'm saying is you'll always have these two elements. One can't eliminate the other. And so you'll always have this dance. And so what happens is with the pendulum, the idea is that it actually attracts the opposites. And whenever there's any conflict, it increases that conflict, because that's how it feeds off the energy. It feeds off the energy of conflict. But the whole natural law, or the energy law behind it is it attracts the opposites to clash them together to eventually bring balance back into
Yep. And that's the interesting thing about the woke side of it. And again, look, I'm very open-minded in how people live their life, what goes on. But, you know, for thousands of years, that none of this stuff existed. And a lot of it has really only existed within the last maybe 25, 30 years. And it just amazes me when these people speak that, you know, they're so confident and certain, well, this is the way. And it's not the way it's always been. Like this, it feels like this is an aberration in human history.
Well, to be honest, see, when you step back and you look at the picture and you just watch nature play out, you actually start to notice that the same certainty and belief that they're right happens on both sides. It happens on our side as well. And if you go back throughout the history, that's all wars, all major conflicts are caused by this pattern that happens time and time and time and time again. In fact, a couple of days ago, somebody knocked on my door, and it was this old lady from the Jehovah's Witnesses. And she asked me if I want to escape from suffering, and I took her little leaflet and I brought it in, and it totally reminded me of my mates in the pub in the Awaken side who are trying to sign people up to this pendulum to get rid of suffering and to get rid of. And then when you listen to the Justice Warriors, they're exactly the same. They want equality, they want inclusion, and so it's the same pattern over and over and over again. In fact, I remember at some point last year when I actually started to notice the exact non-mirror image of the two pendulums, when people on the pro-COVID side didn't want people to get into their houses if they hadn't been vaccinated, and the people on the other side didn't want to be with anybody who had been vaccinated because they were shedding. And it was like a mirror looking at the two sides were looking at each almost identical opposing side.
Yeah, I do say this, that because we like to talk about sheep, and the sheeple, when actually, I mean, they still exist but that's not people want to be part of a tribe, you know, and what I think your next point you talk about is the structures and the unconscious forces that exist. And I'm interested in your take on this, because what I see is that obviously we're very engaged politically, but the vast majority of people are not politically engaged at all. They just don't care. But you'll get 45,000 people turning out at Ibrox. You'll get 50,000 people at Parkhead. You'll get millions of people out watching the football. So is that done deliberately? Like, because what is the phrase? If you give them bread and circuses, the people will never revolt. Do you think that sport is a construct to keep people under control?
I just think it's a part of the natural expression of universal energy, that people will always break up into opposing sides, and there will always be this conflict. Because if I remember what happened last year, and this is one of the things I've noticed, because I wouldn't say I was politically active in any way at the moment. Mm-hmm. I kind of officially left all this kind of stuff about after the first lockdown mentally. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed last year was I actually managed to predict when the lockdowns were going to cease and when things were falling apart quite a few months before. And the reason why I was able to do this was I hang about my mate's shop. He sells food for racing pigeons, and so I was getting, right through all the lockdowns, I was getting access to all the opinion and people coming through. And 99% of the people that were coming through were pro-COVID, and they were all getting their vaccinations, mm-hmm. etc. But by the time it got to the second vaccinations, none of them were awake, but they all started to say, I'm not going to have a third vaccination. Yeah. Then by the time it came to the third, they were saying it, and there was a lot of swearing behind it. And so I started to actually see the things beginning to actually crumble. And I looked up the stats a couple of months later for the vaccinations, and the first vaccination, there was 5 million of us who said no. The mm-hmm. second vaccination, it was 12 million, and the third vaccination, it was 20 million, and a huge number of these people weren't awake. So what I'm saying is, whenever there is a strong energy pushed into the world, there will be a reaction of the same or greater effect. So I think what's going to happen is, I think a lot of this is going to cancel itself out anyway, and I don't think we're going to end up with a dystopian future that a lot of us are frightened of. And if you look at what happened to what's happened recently with the transgender thing, that's starting to crumble now. All the sporting associations are now coming out almost at the same time, again like an energetic pendulum, and they're starting to ban male transgender athletes in women's sports. And then if you look at what happened to Nicola Sturgeon, so a lot of it's going to happen naturally anyway.
Yeah, and it is interesting as well with Sturgeon. It ties in exactly perfectly with what you're talking about. She was unassailable just 6 months ago. She was still doing her well, not so much with COVID, but she was doing her press conferences. She was doing these things, and now she's like gone. There's police raiding her house with tents up. I mean, I think that's all a bit over the top. And she's now talking today about she's going to be fostering a child, and it just shows you how quickly it can happen. But
when you think about it, David, right? Think how quickly the vaccine passports disappeared in the lockdown, and there was no reason given. It was literally done within 2 or 3 days, and it just disappeared. And so that to me, that was a pendulum that was just kind of stopped in its tracks.
But Brian, you know, you're talking about they're using techniques that you use, you know, some and for a bit of fun, but also for serious to help people. Surely this isn't healthy. That the government, the Western governments are using these techniques on their population. This can't be healthy.
Well, the thing is, you've got to go back to the nature of duality. You can't actually eliminate the unhealthy. You can't eliminate the people with bad intentions. You're always going to have the two in the world, and this is going to oscillate and move backwards and forwards all the time. One of the mistakes I believe that the people on our side make is that they think the world is going to be awake, and these evil people at the top are going to disappear, and we're going to have a new utopia. Now that just sounds like the communist idea. That just sounds like the idea they're trying to sell to us. Again, it's another pattern. And so really what you've got to, the way I see it is, when you step back and you just watch the duality play out, it's just a pattern that plays itself out. And when you step back and you observe instead of participate, then you get your true rational mind back, and you can actually start putting your energy into creating the reality that you want in your life and the people around you. Because for every hour, every day that you're caught up in this pendulum, and you're caught up in either the dystopian future scenario or the COVID one, your energy, your life force has been literally drained away from you, and your ability to manifest a better life for you and your family has been drained away.
But then, so that's fair. But then I unlike Thatcher, I believe in society. I do believe in a nation and people, and I as much as I do focus on myself and what I do in my family, how could I be safe and living in my own power and strength if there's people running about with machetes, or if there's no economy? You know, how does that work?
Well, I'll ask you the question. When was the last person that you've seen with a machete, David, personally?
Well, quite not personally, but quite regularly on social media. You see a lot of very disturbing scenes from cities.
But that's not your reality. What happens is you're being fed up specific images on social media that have a sensational element with it, and it gives you a distorted sense of what reality really is. Reality is a lot more than what we see on social media. And the thing about social media and the algorithms, right, the more you look at a certain thing, it'll give you more of that. And the more and more distorted your reality becomes.
Yeah, but I mean, I get that, but I don't think I don't recognise the society that we live in. I mean, I don't think we live in a very unsafe. I don't feel afraid like that. But the roads are a mess. The potholes are bad. The grass isn't as nicely cut. The flower beds. You know, I noticed that things aren't as nice as they used to be, though, Brian. You know, I can't.
True.
We can't hide away from that, can we?
Well, I just don't notice them so much. I'll tell you, when I I'm not going to say woke up, because that makes me sound like I'm awake and everybody else is, when I'm probably in my own little trance here, my own little wonderland. But when I changed my point of view after the first lockdown, I mean, I actually went into the lockdowns in a really bad place anyway. I was caring for my mother for 5 or 6 years, and just before the lockdown, she was found in the street in her jammies and in a really cold night. She was certified into a care home. And so 5 days later, the lockdowns came, so we couldn't actually get in to see her. And so when I went into the lockdowns, in a really bad place. But throughout these lockdowns, I know friends of mine who sunbathed in their gardens, they got good tans, they got paid for doing nothing. They absolutely loved the lockdowns. So my reality was completely different to their reality, if that makes sense. And then what happened was, after about 3 or 4 months in the summer, I was actually allowed to visit her at her window, and if it was a good day, they put her outside behind a wired fence. And my mother was really confused, and she even begged me to help her commit suicide. So that was, and then I would go away into isolation. But what I seen at that time was that how powerful this was. You could actually take really caring people, professional people, and turn them into jailers. Now, that was my reality, but their reality was that they were protecting my mother. It hadn't actually occurred to them that a virus can get through a chicken wire fence. It was a big gated garden. But they had two realities. And I remember a couple of months later when they started talking about the FEMA camps. And at that point, I knew that it was totally possible to at least manipulate and get a percentage of the public to become jailers, because I'd actually seen it happen with my mother. And then later on that year, we were allowed to get into the inside to see them in October for one visit, and then it was shut down again. And I remember on the second visit, the two carers came in, and I could see the fear on my mother's eyes, where one took her up one arm and the other one lifted her up just like a prisoner in a prison. She broke down in tears, just asking to give me a hug. Now, she hadn't seen me from March to October in a building with her, and she got me for 20 minutes and they dragged her away. And I heard her all the way going down the corridors phone the police, have been kidnapped, which she had been. That wasn't dementia, she actually had been. And so that was my reality in the lockdowns. But like I said, my other friends were having a completely different reality. And when the lockdowns actually finished during the first year, the first amount of lockdowns, I remember at that point where I'd spent a good couple of months totally isolated on my own, trying to deal with all this rage and anger and stuff going through my body, which I actually managed to release. And then when I released that stuff, I just decided to get back down and start creating goals again and start focusing on how I would actually want things to be. And I remember a couple of weeks after that, there was a time when I was down in Portobello where I picked up a book that I'd ordered off of Amazon. It was a positive thinking book of some sort. And it was a beautiful sunny day, and I sat down on the main road, and I also remember I was right next to the traffic lights, and this bus pulled up, and just outside the bus there was a little kind of cafe there, and there was an old gentleman with a radio, and there was this female there, and all of a sudden this loud music came on, and this female happened to be Brazilian, and she got up and did this Brazilian dance in front of the bus, and half of the bus at the top, they all got up and started dancing, doing this Brazilian dance. And then all of a sudden it kind of stopped and they went away again. And I found that was really bizarre, because in the middle of all this depression, anxiety and fear, this kind of like, this surreal bit of reality, this experience kind of just jumped out. And what I realized is that when you actually shift your focus and you start to look at things, and you start to ignore all this negative, constant negative media, no matter what side it's on, you actually start to see a lot of good in the world, and you actually start to notice that things aren't as bad as you think that they are.
That's what I don't want to hear this, Brian. I need rage. It's rage that gets me through the day, and anger. I don't want to hear this. Let me on my pendulum. Let me keep going further to the right on my pendulum.
I think you're actually changed to the pendulum. I don't think there's much hope of that. But what I'm saying to you is, that if you do that, this is the way I look at it as well, right? There might be sometimes in the future we really are in a fight, and we really need to get together and really need to make things happen. But if you're running this dystopian future and the world is ending through your mind all the time, by the time we get to that place, you're going to be worn out and run down.
Yeah, I mean, I do 100% agree, and I think the simple analogy is the one on the airplane. Who's the first person you put the oxygen mask on? You put it on yourself, because if you and yourself are not in a good position, how on earth can you help anybody else or make any changes? And yeah, I mean, I think that can be a failing on perhaps even my part, is that you do feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. But Brian, and some people are mentioning this, but I think we all get what you're saying. But then you've got the World Health Organization, you've got the United Nations, you've got all these globalist central banks, NATO. I mean, how can we just live in bliss knowing that that's all going on out there?
Well, it's a really simple rule: is if you can't have any control over it, ignore it. Because if you can't do anything, there's no point in putting energy into it. In fact, the more you put energy into things you have no control over, the more they win. Because the only real changes that you can make are in your own immediate environment. And they don't want you to know that, if there is such people planning to that degree. They don't actually want you to step into your true power, which is the ability to manifest things the way you want them in your own environment. And if everybody did that, then there wouldn't be in a situation that we are in now.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, the one thing I always say is that change only will happen in this country is if individuals make changes. Like it was individuals who decided not to get jabbed. It was individuals who made the decision not to wear a mask. So I do definitely agree that you need to be in a good. I mean, all this stuff is really fascinating, Brian. And as I say, I do vividly remember our last conversation, and I'm not. Well, it's a compliment to you. I have a lot of guests on, and I don't always remember things that they say, but I do vividly remember what you said, and I'm sure I'll certainly remember more about this tonight. But I think, as I said, I think I speak for our wider audience, though, that yes, we get you have to look after yourself. Yes, we do, but we are angry. We're angry about what we see happening in this country. We're angry at these politicians. Are we not allowed to stay angry?
You are allowed to do anything that you want. But the question is, right, there's only two certainties in life: time and energy. What are you spending your time on, and what are you spending your energy on? Because both these elements are finite. Do you really want sturgeon in your head making you angry? Well, not so much now, but whatever's replaced that space in your head, do you really want that? The other thing about anger is whenever you're in a state of anger, you're in a trance. And so basically you're looking through the world through the lens of anger. Whenever you're in a state of fear, you're looking through the world through the lens of fear. So everything looks fearful. And like I was saying to you before about the cup that seems to be a solid, in actual fact, it's just pure energy. It's our mind that actually creates the reality. And so do you really want to live in a fearful world or an angry world, which is also bad for your health? Anger.
And I mean, it is also true. You only live once, you know, and there's a lot of there's a lot of that. But so okay, well, how then could we manifest positive change then? How can we say we look at something that we don't like, we aren't happy with something, which is fine because
right.
But well, how can you then manifest change in a positive manner?
Right. So basically what I'm finding is people that are coming to me time and time again, they've got uncontrollable anxiety and sometimes they're depressed. So if we just look at depression and anxiety and understand what it is from my point of view really quickly, right? Anxiety and depression are two sides of the same coin, right? Anxiety is the fear of a dystopian or a negative future, where depression is all to do with the past, some kind of loss that we've had in the past. And so, in a sense, when the COVID hit us and we all learned about the WHO and all the manipulation that was going on in the so-called path that we're going down, then we've all lost something, or we all feel we've actually lost something, a future that we had programmed into our mind. And the thing about your mind is it can't actually work without a future to move towards. That's the first part. The second part is that depression also goes way beyond the COVID stuff. It goes way beyond the things in the past that you haven't got over. Maybe you lost a family member, a relationship. And so people carry a lot of unresolved negative emotions, right? So what you really want to be able to do is you want to be able to release all these negative emotions, like lenses. Once you release it, you start to see things more clearly. But one of the big things that you can do without any therapy or anything like that, I'll give you a couple of ways to do that, right? First thing is limit your time on social media. I can't say this enough. Give yourself a 21-day challenge not to watch anything to do with COVID on either side of the fence for 21 days. Stop posting for 21 days. Come back to later on if you want. That's the first thing. Stop feeding your head with all this stuff, right? The second thing that you can do without paying for a therapist is you need to become aware of the feelings and the emotions and the thoughts that are running through your head, right? And what you want to do is you want to get rid of them, right? And one of the ways that you can, and I've used in the past when I've went through extremely challenging times in my life, is there's a couple of things that you can do. First thing is a really good thing you can do if you can get the time is get out into nature. One of the things I used to walk all the way up to the top of Arthur Seat until I was out of breath. Then I would lie back and I would stare at the clouds and I would just let the clouds go over and I would just let my mind run over and run over and over. If I felt like falling asleep, I'd fall asleep. After 3 or 4 or 5 days, your whole body feels completely energized and that depression can actually just go. Second thing, if you can get into a gym, if you can't afford the gym, get into some kind of exercise.
Yeah. Well, listen, I totally agree with that. We do, and we can get caught up in this to just forget the beauty of nature and the joy of seeing a field of wheat and corn and just the beauty of what we have. And especially fortunate being in where I am in the west of Scotland. And so for me, like I would say it's about balance. Like, obviously, I can't have people not watching social media for 21 days, Brian, okay, from a selfish UNN perspective. But I think
you can limit the amount. The other thing I would say would be, right, is to start setting down small goals, things that you've always wanted to do but have put off because of all this doom and gloom that's supposed to be further down the line. Start to imagine and see things the way you want them instead of seeing this dystopian future and this kind of fear mongering from politicians. Actually start to create images in your mind and spend time visualizing seeing members of your family happy, healthy, and then
Yep.
work towards getting them there. If you've got any goals or things that you really want to do, start to visualize and see yourself achieving them. Start to fill your, this is how it was meant to be. This is how you reverse it. Start to fill your mind with things that you want rather than the things that you don't want. Because if I was to, you get attracted to the things that you don't want as much as the things that you focus on what you want. If I was to say to you right now, don't think of a pink elephant with a blue ribbon and white spots. That's what you're thinking about. So if you're saying to yourself, I don't want this dystopian future, it's in your mind constantly. And the thing is, your mind can't tell the difference between a real or imagined experience. And so it actually reacts as if you're already in this dystopian future. So you're already acting as if you're already oppressed, as if you're already in this future hell, which probably will never happen in the way you have it in your head.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is interesting. When you're talking about that, that's the one thing I always notice, because I know people and we've seen people who have gone to prison, and obviously people fear prison, and the one thing people actually often say is it's not as bad as I thought it would be, and that's not saying that we all want to go to prison, but it is because like people have that fear, and as you say, usually your worst fears don't come true. Brian, listen, absolutely really interesting stuff. How can people get in touch with you if they do want to do anything with you, or where can they follow the work that you're doing?
Right, I kind of gave it a little bit of a break, but I've been pulled back into it. But I still have a page up. If you haven't registered for it, I did a free workshop for the Scottish People's Forum a couple of years ago. The free audios and some other meditation audios are up there. It's awakenedminds.info. So if you go to awakenedminds.info, you'll get onto my mailing list. You'll get the stuff that was put up there last year. But I am actually planning a series of workshops, maybe live or even online. So you can keep in touch with what I'm doing on there.
Brilliant. Well, I'll get propaganda reprogramming advanced mind.